That's what I was told. Very honored to have him share our insights on psychological safety in the industry with us. But before that, maybe Faz, thank you for being here, and please do share a quick introduction about yourself.
Hi, thanks, Ital. Hi, everyone. Just as my introduction was, my name is Fas Sufian. I'm currently one of the executive committee members for MOXI, Malaysian Oil and Gas and Energy Services Council.
Safety has always been about physical safety, and now we're finally really paying attention to psychological safety. And the ISO has also come up with a specific standard called the ISO 45003, which is all about mitigating any kind of psychosocial risk.
Mhm.
And one of the most important things is that within relationships or dynamics in the environment, it's
Mhm.
important to reduce as much psychological or psychosocial, which is the relational related risks. I just wanted to put out a definition for everybody first before we get into psychological safety. And maybe Faz, you can share your own version of it as well. We don't always have to listen to the academics, yeah? Okay, so about 1965, the first definition of psychological safety that came out was really about us feeling safe within ourselves whenever it comes to changes. So,
Mhm.
we go through change all the time, and psychological safety was feeling safe within yourself as you experience changes.
Mhm.
And then came along 1990, where it was not only about feeling safe within yourself whenever you go through changes, but feeling safe enough to talk about it without any fear of consequences or risk to your reputation, your career, and your life. Then comes along 1999. It's not just a lot about you feeling safe within yourself, you feeling safe to speak out. Because unfortunately, when sometimes people speak up, they might start feeling safe because they can speak out, but they start making other people feel at risk when they start speaking
Mhm.
out. So in 1999, Anne Edmondson kind of, operationalized a new definition of it, which is it is a creation of a shared belief in an environment that anyone and everyone should feel safe for interpersonal risk, meaning we can say anything within the work environment without any fear of consequences, and also ensure that we continue to keep that environment sacred so that the next conversation can also have that.
Mhm.
And psychological safety, I think, is no longer just about being safe or feeling safe, but it is a pathway for us to end up becoming brave,
Yeah.
not just staying safe. So, Faz, what is your definition or understanding of it?
Okay, I didn't have to Google it, but from what you just explained on the evolution of what it means about psychological safety, right? I think oil and gas is one of those industries that really focuses a lot on safety, including psychological safety. And I think we have been quite good proponents on championing psychological safety. Like what you mentioned, now the definition is that not just about being safe in your own space, but creating that environment where you feel interdependently safe with each other, with your actions and all that. And
Awesome.
I can give a specific example about that because, especially on site for oil and gas, right? Especially, we have two concepts for safety that is always being practiced. One is we call the stop work policy,
Mhm.
and I think that relates directly to being safe to voice out and knowing that you're in a safe environment that you are able to voice out when you see something that is not right. And when you say stop work policy, it's not just about seeing something that relates to physical safety, but it's also about when you see another person that's in distress, where you have the authority, you have the support when you want to stop work. That is quite scary in oil and gas, right? Imagine if you're working on a platform and you're producing barrels of oil per day. To have to stop operations always equates to money. And I think the industry has been very strongly supportive of stop work policies. And I think that creates a very safe space for people to feel empowered and also safe to decide on the right thing to do. The second element that I think relates well to this is something that we call the UCU Act policy, right? And especially on the upstream sector, this is a daily thing where nearly everybody on board has to submit something called the UCU Act form, whereas it's trying to inculcate a generative safety culture so people will be observant and it's okay to point out things that we feel that doesn't look right. It's not about pointing fingers, but it's about voicing it out and writing in a form to say that that cable doesn't look safe there on the floor. Things should be improved and all that kind of thing. So I think those are two quite clear examples of supporting what you mentioned about the definition.
Oh, no, that's really fantastic, and also must be very, very nerve-wracking for someone to actually say we need to stop and halt operations right now,
Yeah.
knowing that we have that whole concept of Autobots, right? On time,
Hmm.
on schedule, on
Yes.
budget, and also you see you act. For those who don't know what generative work culture means, would you be able to explain a little bit further, Faz?
Well, generative work culture, I don't know the exact textbook definition, but for us, it's more of um, inculcating. It's not a reactive safety culture, not preventive. It's actually generative, where you are actually so cognizant of safety around you,
Mm,
and it's always top of mind, and it's more than preventive, right? It's actually thinking way steps ahead
mm,
on what could be a risky situation or what could be a safety factor.
yeah,
And generative also means that coming out with more improvements on what you can do to further improve safety around
yeah.
you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, we did come across the concept of generative safety culture and how that deviates, or that's like, a step change from being reactive to proactive to whatever, not all the way up to generative. And that's the highest form of safety behavior. And I think that has a lot to do with setting extremely high safety standards and figuring out and generating all kinds of ideas to be able to get there. And I really love what you have said about the UCU Act. Because that's reporting. Reporting is the most important thing, right?
But as a company that is preaching or practicing true safety, um, we're still on that journey where we're not getting much of this kind of culture in the workplace, in the office, for example. So companies like SM Group, we are currently trying to inculcate that no matter where our employees are, it's not just about being on the client's platform where everything is about dollars and cents, or trying to do a good job, or trying to make sure that we complete the job without any safety incidents. But here's where the generative culture comes back into play, right? We are now pushing for even the office staff should be submitting UCU Act reports as well. Just a simple example. If we go to do a walkabout in the office, we would see some people would stack their files under the table, and this would be sort of a restriction if there's an emergency and they're trying to vacate. Let's say there's a fire emergency, and these are obstructions. So these are the kind of culture that's still not prevalent um, in the whole spectrum. We had a small fire that broke out from an aircon compressor in the office. Upon investigation, it was because of clogged something clogging and causing the fire, an electrical fire. So these are the kind of walkabouts that we don't do in the office. We take it for granted, right? That everything is safe just because we're not on a dangerous site. Um, so I think there's still some ways to go in terms of making sure at all levels um, this is practiced well.
What are some interesting insights that you have with regards to causes of incidents in the workplace, right? I mean, I know it's about psychological safety, which is about having conversations. So if you could just share with us, like, what are the conversations that people don't have that they should have,
Ooh.
that would lead to a lot of this drama. We call it drama because it's a never ending cycle. This year
Mhm.
it happens, next year it happens, year after year after year. It's like a Korean drama. You think it's something that you can put an end to, but it will happen the next day or the next year or whatever not. So what are the conversations that you feel are being ahead? We know when you see people reporting the UCU Act,
Mhm.
what kind of conversations do they have when they report, and what kind of conversations are still lacking in the reporting?
Mhm. Well, um, I'll just give an example. If it's on a work site, right? Sometimes it takes a certain party to take the lead in whether they are having a deeper conversation or not, right? I'm not comparing, but if I were to compare one operator, um, I'll just name it. That's no harm naming it. Shell, for example. Shell always pushes for deeper conversations on reports that they've received, right? So if there's a UAUC report, it's not just about um, submitting them and then maybe choosing the best one and getting a gift, right? So that's the usual norm at work sites, right? You're rewarding people for submitting a good insight from a UAUC. But having deeper conversations, I think that's another step that needs to be taken more seriously, because just submitting forms is just compliance, in my opinion. Recurring things. It's as simple as finger injuries. We get it all the time. You know, companies every quarter any company will have a finger injury campaign every year. But it's still a recurring thing, and either it's complacency or it's actual monitoring of people in terms of pinch points and all those kind of hazards. But finger injury is always a recurring issue, right? Um, but just to share something unique that happened to us this year, we had two cases that resulted in chopper medevac from offshore, which is a big deal, right? So one of the case was this relates back to the pandemic. We had a freelancer um, that came on board for us to execute one of our jobs. So now this freelancer was good as what is good at what he does. He's a specialist on that specific work scope. But all these years, he's only been doing it onshore, right? So due to the urgency of the job, we had to get him to fly offshore to do his specialized task. So this guy went through all the training and permit. I mean, he's green lighted to go offshore. But what we didn't realize was um, this person, although his offshore medical records were still valid for another year, usually valid for 2 years, right? Um, we don't know within that 1 year of the pandemic, and he was at home. There was no checking on his sugar levels, diabetes, and all that. So when you put a guy that's never been offshore, put him on a vessel, a long journey onto the platform, a level of anxiety took over, and I think it triggered something about his diabetes, and he went into shock, right? So this case, we're still having conversations about it, because it's if you're going through just the normal checkpoints to see whether the person is fit to go offshore, is it still enough, for example, right? um, do we need further, sort of checking on a person's blood sugar level or whatnot, right? So this thing comes into discussion. The second thing that happened to us was something nearly similar. Another crew that went on board. Uh, this is a stop work. This goes back to the stop work um, policy thing. So this guy was having chest pains when he was on board. So being, very masculine, and within that masculine environment, he just shrugged it off as having a little bit of a heartburn. He never told anyone about it, but according to our reports, our post-mortem reports, there were a few people that he did say that he had some chest pain, and he just shrugged it off. Within less than 24 hours, the pain became worse, and he ultimately collapsed. And when the medic went to check on him, diagnosed him that he was having a minor stroke. And this guy is in his late 20s. And full medical records, his medical was clean and everything, right? So when we did a postmortem, we found out that, again, also, he the pandemic happened and he was not going offshore. There was no check on how he was doing health wise. He didn't do another last pre-check before going offshore. So, and it also taught us a lesson of about the people around him. Is it okay if you're seeing, another person under a bit of duress or stress, to stop work and say that you're not looking that well? You better get yourself checked. But probably in the environment, it was not at top of mind. People were saying that, okay, he's just having a bit of chest pain, right? So yeah, those were two
Wow.
quite scary incidents that happened.
Yeah, that seems to be relatable. Obviously, even outside of the industry, just as a normal human being, right? And what kind of stops us from having those conversations, actually reporting it and doing something about it, is not
Mm,
something that is happening for the first time. It's happened, year after year, maybe even month after month, generation
mhm,
after generation as well. One of the interesting things that actually moved this agenda of psychological safety was a research that was done by Anne Edmondson, who was the one who came up with the newest definition. And what she found was that there were two hospitals that she was studying as a researcher. And these two hospitals had different levels of death rate. One hospital had higher levels of death rate than the other. And she was wondering, like, why is it that this hospital has higher death rate?
mhm.
So in all of her analysis, what it boiled down to was that there was one hospital that was reporting more mistakes, reporting more issues, reporting more drama than another hospital. And ironically, she thought that the one that reported more would be the one who had more higher death rate, but it was actually the opposite. The one who reported more issues, more drama,
Yeah.
um, had lower death rate, and that was the start of why psychological safety became very important in high risk environments. Because in that particular hospital where more people were dying, they realized that the reason why people were not reporting was because there was some inherent anxiety,
Mm,
fear, or lack of training on being able to speak up,
mhm,
and that person listening, acting upon it, and using it as a point of challenging everybody going forward rather than finger pointing.
mhm.
um, and we did a recent study. So I think you were talking about age groups and demographics and stuff like that. So I just wanted to ask you, like, at which demographics do you feel, or which certain categories of people do you feel are more susceptible to being vocal, being acting about it, acting upon it, and then actually doing something to challenge the entire ecosystem, right? You did mention Shell earlier. We may or may not want to mention any names, or
Okay.
I mean, but that's completely fine. Good things are always mentioned.
Yeah,
Good things
good
are
thing is
always
okay, right?
mentioned. Yeah, so we did a quick study, and maybe we could do like a banter, and I'm just gonna ask you a question, and then you let me know what your thoughts are, and
Ooh,
then maybe
okay,
also share with you some research around it. So
sure.
for psychological safety, there are four components. One of it would be inclusion, meaning me and you, we can feel inclusive and have a chat. The second
Mhm,
one would be depth of learning. So how deep do we discover what's going on? Like, for example, if it's a heart attack, or if it's files under the table, like, why is it that you're putting the files under the table even though you've been told three times? What is the depth of, like, why are you really behaving this way? Is it your mother, your father? I mean,
yeah,
you can go all the way
they can
deep,
go
deep
so deep, right?
level of learner. So the second one is called learner. The third one would be two people contributing, and it's a nice dynamic idea generation from both parties. And the last one would be to take the idea, challenge the entire ecosystem to be better, because every other person could benefit from learning. And I do work with oil and gas companies, and I think
Mm,
majority of you are doing your best at it, and I'm thoroughly impressed. Yeah.
mm,
So, which demographics, or rather, I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, where do you
mhm,
think Malaysia struggles, or Malaysian oil and gas sector struggles the most? Is it inclusion,
mhm.
learner, contributor, or challenger? Where do you think we struggle the most? Is it the inclusiveness that we cannot be a we, or is it the learning that's not deep enough? Contributor ideas, or challenging? Where do you think we're struggling the most?
I think challenging.
Challenging. You are
Yeah.
100% correct. Well,
I think it's a mix of culture, Asian culture, and but I think things are changing. I think the
yeah.
Gen Zs are a bit more vocal,
Mhm.
not just about safety, but about a lot of things. The Gen Zs are, I think, slightly feel a bit more empowered, but it also depends on how strong the culture of where they're working at um, has a hold on them. I think Hital dropped out. Ali, is Hital still there?
Sorry,
Ah, there
I
you go.
had a little bit
Okay,
of drama that was going on
it's okay.
outside.
So yeah,
I
I
think,
think it's a mix of culture, but it's not just a mix of Asian culture. It also is affected by the culture of the organization that they're working in. And
yeah.
I think a lot of people will agree with me. Different organizations, you sort of feel a different vibe, right? In
Yeah.
terms of the culture there. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then we also have a question from Audrey, which is In this economic climate, psychological safety may not be or doesn't seem to be at the top of mind because there is a business bottom line. So, there is the stop work policy, but then at the same time, there is the autoboss and, that pressure to perform and generate revenue. How do you resolve or come to a resolution on both?
Ooh. Mm, it's hard when you don't have an example to paint across the different levels of people in the organization, right? For us, I wouldn't say that it's good for us, but something actually happened that related to a fatality outside of work. And this happened quite a while back, I think about 8, 9 years ago, but we are still deeply affected by it, that it becomes a talking point. Um, Especially when we're talking to new recruits, or when we're giving a serious talk about why nothing is more important than safety, right? Even when it comes to affecting bottom line. um, I think it's not easy for management to juggle that, but at the same time, when you're dealing with for a company like ours, our only assets are our people, aside from tools and accessories and all that. But something happened within SM Group that one of our beloved staff actually passed away due to an accident. It was more on fatigue, but it just goes to show that fatigue at work, will affect you even outside of work. So it's not just about completing the job; it's how it can affect you, because you know um, you can't replace life, and you can't replace a life that's lost or a limb that's lost, and such. But I think a lot of it has to also come from the customer side, to be able to empower service providers like ourselves, that we do have that avenue, right? um, but let me tell you how it will affect the bottom line even worse if you don't focus on safety, right? Let's not talk about physical harm. Let's talk about being in a we're talking about psychological safety, right? Being in a safe space. Um, we've just dealt with cases where people were leaving certain of our subsidiaries because they didn't feel safe. They had mental stress on the workload that they were carrying, and when they voiced it out to their immediate superiors, it was not being heard, not being dealt with. Fear of being ostracized, fear of being singled out. So in the end, that led to them giving up and just leaving the organization. Now, I think that relates to psychological safety as well. Yeah, and replacing, especially good people within the company, actually costs a lot more, than what you would worry about if you neglect issues like this, right? And another point I want to share is that the government's latest push on making sexual harassment for our HR departments to it's mandatory now to have a briefing on sexual harassment policies and all that. I think that relates to psychological safety space as well, in the workplace.
Any conversation, that is difficult would require psychological safety.
Yes, yes. And this is the
Yeah.
first time we're actually going to do it. Having an actual briefing on sexual harassment. What is sexual harassment? What can you do about it? Where's the safe space for you to go? So things like this. So within the organization, I think not just leaders and managers, but I can never stress this enough when people ask, like, what's the secret of success of running a good organization? I say it's not just sales, it's not just operations. The two most important department in the company is the human resource department, the HR, and as well as the accounts, obviously, lah, for
Yeah.
women.
Absolutely. Can I ask, how are you currently measuring psychological safety or the experience of it in the workplace, if at all? And also, how do you measure progress? It's great that the theme of psychological safety has now warranted its criticality in the workplace. I'm just wondering how companies right now are measuring it and how they're measuring progress through their interventions as well.
Right. Measuring quantitatively on psychological safety, we don't have specific mechanisms for it. But what we have done is we've improved our evaluation form, training needs analysis forms, and these are done at all levels, right? I mean, it's not just between a general manager and all the staff, but it's between, for example, team leaders being evaluated by, technicians being evaluated by team leader. So we have included columns in our evaluation forms for anything that during the evaluation time they want to talk about. It's not just about their job scope. It's not just about feedback about their commercial package. Or they can voice out anything they want, and this goes straight to the HR, right? But unfortunately, yeah, I saw your pre-question before, and it got me thinking last night. What quantitative measures are we putting in place? Qualitative measures, when COVID happened, we focused a little bit more about mental stress and psychological safety, purely because it was agonizing for our crew to be on quarantine pre-mobilization. It was as long as 14 days quarantine in a small hotel room before actually being able to go offshore, and then coming back and having another 14 days quarantine before they can go back to their loved ones, right? So prior to COVID, being offshore already is some level of mental stress involved. Can you imagine another 28 days, 14 days before and 14 days after coming back? They have to isolate themselves in a room. They feel the support and they feel the backup.
Right. I really appreciate what you've said just earlier about if you're a junior staff, you probably would. But although we kind of contradicted ourselves earlier, saying that the younger ones are more vocal and they challenge
Mhm.
things more. At the same time, when you're junior, in a particular context, do you have that courage to actually speak up and act when you see something that is not right? And the data that we've collected, so we measure psychological safety across the oil and gas sector. We've got certain trends and stuff like that. So while the younger generation tends to want to be more vocal about things, our data actually suggests that they are the ones that are suffering with regards to actually being able to open up and challenge things compared to others. Predominantly, the 46 to 55-year-old age group are the ones that generally feel more comfortable to open up, and by almost about 6 to 7% more likely to speak up compared to a 18 to 35-year-old demographic. Yeah,
Sure.
and coupled together with job levels, right? So for job levels, senior managers and general managers in our data pool are more likely to speak up. So the older you are, the higher position that you are in, the more likely you are to speak up. But actually, where it is where the tire hits the road, right? That's where drama is, and that's where people are able to see what's right, what's wrong, and they feel it the most. But that's where it might not be happening. So I wanted to know, I mean, just to put it out there that actually there is a way of measuring it. There is a validated tool that is available that all companies can utilize. And we have that for free as well. So you guys can always come to us and use that. But what gets measured gets done. So I have two questions for you first, maybe one at a time. Hot ones, if you don't mind, okay? Hot ones. So when we do these measurements, so this is advice for us now. When we do these measurements, sometimes it points back up to the leader that is creating that kind of an environment, right? So it's the HRs that will call us in and they'll tell us, okay, Hito, can you do an assessment of what's going on? We'll do an assessment, and it boils down to what is going on in different teams, and we want to break it down so that it's actionable. Sometimes when you do culture surveys or engagement surveys, then it goes back to management. Management doesn't know exactly what to do with it. So we break it down so we know where the hotspots are, stuff like that. And it boils down to a leader. So say, for example, it boils down to, the head of HR himself. That department itself is a hotspot. And there is that resistance. And suddenly the person doesn't feel safe anymore because the data shows that department is the least safe. The sexual harassment cases are higher. The influence at work, people not being able to voice out, so on and so forth, right? So what is your recommendation for us when we come in and when we do audits, when we do assessments, and it boils back down to the leaders, even though the leaders might want it these days in the oil and gas sector. So how would you advise us? What is the right way of doing it so that it is psychologically safe, palatable, and there's no resistance? Otherwise, we go backwards again, 20 years later. Some of the
Right.
things that we hear, when we reveal these results, some of the things that we hear, oh, but of course, data is important. But when people complete their surveys, sometimes they're very busy, or people they
Mm.
tend to complain more than to come up with more constructive things. However, for us, it is eventually data is something that you cannot and
Mm.
don't
Mm.
need to argue about. It's more
Mhm.
of a trend rather than the specific details. So, what would you tell us to do in your opinion or in your advice? How do
What,
we get
what would my
data?
advice be to you as consultants in
I
that kind
guess
of situation?
I guess in general, right? Like anyone going up to the leadership level, they can see it happening over there. What
Mhm.
is your advice about how best to approach it? How best
Mm.
to tell someone so that they can accept that they might be the cause of creating psychologically unsafe or stuck environments?
Yeah, that's a tough one, huh?
Hmm.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I can't say what the advice would be, but um, I would say about what my experience is.
Mhm.
Our group has gone through three hits of HSC, right? And some of them were just very compliant based HSC hits, right? Ticking all the boxes, they want their man hours in, and they're recording LTIs and all that. But our current group head, um, who's been working with us for only about 2 years now, um, has made all that change happen, right? Because when you have somebody that's so passionate leading the charge on HSC and you empower them, and I mean, the whole board of directors, we're not the experts on HSC, so we make sure that we are listening and we are actually taking into consideration what the expert is saying, right? And in our organization, we've empowered him to um, to be on the same level as the head of HR, the group head of finance, the group head of accounts. So everything in the jurisdiction of safety, whether it's mental health, or whether it's physical health, physical safety, what he has in his data and what he has in the form that he has collected, he has the power and the authority to um, not to say manage the situation, to approach the situation from the safety angle, right? Um, so that's how we do it here, right?
Power is bestowed on,
Yeah, but you do have organizations where the owners or board of directors or leaders don't really care much about safety. I mean, those companies still exist. They put not enough emphasis on it, and not even the commercial budget behind safety to ensure that the organization is getting inculcating a generative culture. So I think it goes back down to that, even the safe space created by the actual owners and the leadership team within the organization, that they wanna be better, right? Because if we find data that something is not right, and if there's only excuses being given back when we share the data, then there's something really wrong about that person in that position.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. One of the things that we find works, or rather, we have to use it in order to be able to get through in creating that psychologically safe space, is
Mm.
massaging the context and creating rules of engagement,
Mhm.
almost taking up to about 20 minutes before we begin to have that actual conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost like when when moms have cesarean, right? Doctors don't like cut them straight away. There's like 7 layers of skin
Hmm.
that they cut through one at a time, slowly, slowly, to be able to get there. And yeah, so for some organizations where we find the resistance is very strong, the problem is that time is always of the essence. Tempo
Yeah.
and work pace, in our data, it shows that tempo and work pace, meaning the speed at which things need to be done, is like so quick that if we forget to add in the context and massage in the rules of engagement for that conversation,
Mhm.
it can really backfire. It can really backfire. So a good 15 minutes, things like, say, for example, can we agree that every single person will have equal time to speak in this conversation? Can we agree that none of us are going to take any of this data personally? Can we agree that none of us will make any assumptions about human behavior and whatever not? Can we agree that whatever we're doing is for the best of the organization? And only when we hear, I agree, saya sumpah, all of that, then only we are like, okay, we can begin. And then also have to have some moderator or mediators as well. So it's kind of interesting how conditioning, and then the conversation ends up taking 10 minutes. But if we don't do
Yeah.
that, it can go on for like 10 years later and still
Yes.
be like, yeah, I disagree with what you said. So Simon has a question for you
I
as well.
know it's a tough one. I'm just
Yeah,
reading it now.
in the engineering line and other professional where technical expertise is important, where you have a lot of specialists, what would be the best way to convenience them to allow the more junior employee to speak up and not to scold or negatively view them later? Yeah, totally sense the part of consequence on their jobs and their future career and
Hmm.
reputation for speaking up. So, what are some advice or
I
ideas
was
that
I was about to ask you to answer this one, being the consultants.
I guess maybe you have been there. You have experienced that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
when you say convince them, convince the more senior guy to allow the more junior guy to speak, or to convenience the junior guy to speak.
Maybe we
What do
can
you
take
think?
both.
I think some situations you got to put systems in place. You got to put some carrots, right? I mean, um, it, you know, creating a culture is not easy, right? You have people thinking that it would risk their reputation, it would risk their job security when people are voicing out something about safety that's under their watch, right? So um, probably I can give some examples. If some operators put a lot of emphasis on daily UAUC and reward them, right? Or put a system in place where that senior person or every senior person or supervisor has an element of dealing with a safety issue um, per day, or a set amount per month or something like that. That could make them motivated to make sure that in the element of the evaluation that there's always a safety element, that they've either mitigated risk through their subordinates, or they've worked out something. Another example I would give is one rig operator that I knew that had a really good way of building up the culture. So whenever their management had a safety walkabout on their rig, they were not looking for mistakes. They were not looking to point out that, hey, that's not right, that's not right. Instead, what they did was they looked at everything that was right, and after they do their walkabout, they would call all the personnel and they would list down and comment all the things that they saw that were right, and congratulate them on doing a really good job. Um, so those are the things that I've listened to and I've observed, and I like to see. Um, but going back to Simon's question, is quite, there's no blanket solution to it, Simon. It depends on, you see, even in one company, let's say company X, and they have multiple facilities. It also depends on the OIM of that facility, on how strongly they are creating a good psychologically safety culture on board of their their facility, right? So
Yeah.
it's
I
tough.
really
It's
love
a
what
tough
you.
one.
Yeah, I love what you said about systems. At the end of the day, it has to be a systemic way of creating a particular culture that it is that you're going for, whether it's generative culture or psychological safety, in order to have that generative culture.
Mm.
And so, also, how do you measure your success of psychological safety in your organization? Tough one again, tough one.
Yeah, no, I don't have
Maybe.
I don't have a quantitative measuring tool at the moment, but now I want to.
Yeah, we'll definitely, give you a little bit of resource for that one as well after this, just to thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you, in your personal opinion, who are the ones that are doing it the best, and what are the three things that you feel is the future of all organizations going forward with regards to psychological safety? So, what are the three things that who do you think are the ones doing it the best with regards to psychological safety in organizations? And maybe three things, which is your advice for the oil, gas, and energy industry.
Oh wow! I mean, I haven't really given it a specific thought about who's doing it best in terms of psychological safety. Hmm. I don't have an answer for that one. But if I were to say that a safety culture within an organization that I'm impressed with,
Mhm.
can I name names?
Yeah, I think good things can good things
Okay,
can.
like
Bad things we just yeah, we don't.
I think Shell has always been consistent. Um, Shell has even done safety forums where only CEOs are invited, and it's a full day forum. No HSE managers, no operation managers, only the number one guy in all the organizations, right? And we're stuck in a hall for a whole day, and we're doing puzzles and we're doing ice breaking sessions, and we're just talking about safety. So they really build a culture from top down, which is kind of good. I would have to commend Petronas for the never ending effort on improving safety. It is a journey, and the challenge for Petronas is because this is HQ, right? This is home base, and this is where everything needs to start. Whereas if you're talking to an MNC, they're basically taking a model that has already been passed down. Um, on the service provider side, apart from the MNCs, which are quite a different benchmark, I would say a lot of good local companies that are it's not about the size of the company. I think so. It's hard to pinpoint who's actually doing a better job than the rest in terms of psychological safety. But I can't
Yeah,
choose. Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the things that we wanted to work with Moxie about as well to actually create a benchmark. So we've got
Hmm.
a couple of the MNCs on board already, and then wanting to have our own local Malaysian study around it and learning from each other as well. That could be quite a valuable thing to do, and seeing where the pain points lie as well. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to take research to the next level in building up psychological safety in this sector as well. I think you did want to share with us a couple of slides, a couple of things that you guys were doing as well. Did you want to share with us anything?
Sure. But just to point out, I forgot when you mentioned about Moxie. I didn't mention in my introduction. Currently, I'm the exco in charge of mentoring the HSC working group.
Mhm.
And we're working with the new committee lineup within the working group. Um, we
Fantastic.
we have a lot of initiatives that we want to roll out. One of which I think, and any Moxie members out there that's listening in, Moxie is going to launch the new website.
Mhm.
And one of the things that the HSC working group wants to do, especially for the members, is to have a repository of information, data, manuals, where even new startup oil and
Mhm.
gas companies can refer to in terms of doing bridging documents for your HSC manuals. But
Fantastic.
also we want to share HSC alerts, because sometimes the mode of HSC alerts being shared between players in this oil and gas industry, it's not really all encompassing. Sometimes you get it and you're just forwarding it via WhatsApp. You don't know what's legit and what's not.
Mhm.
So
That's fantastic. Definitely something that we can and should chat about as well. We did a recent study of about 606. I think the sample size was about 606, and it was psychological safety in the oil and gas fraternity.
mm,
And one of the interesting things that came out was that psychological safety was the highest amongst the. Sorry, just give me 1 second, yeah. I have to apologize. I just rescued a pigeon, and it was an injured pigeon, and now it just flew. It's not been able to fly, and now it's just flying around the house, and I'm so happy.
mm.
Yeah, best day ever for me. Sorry, I just had to go and check what was going on with it because I could hear some flapping, and it's not been able to like fly for the past few days. sidetrack a little bit. Coming back to
No
this,
worries.
one of the interesting things that we found out was that in across the oil and gas sector, we were looking at different departments that had higher psychological safety levels. One of it was the digital excellence or technology departments within companies. And that is so super interesting that psychological safety was super high over there. And that we tried to kind of dig into why that was the case. And when we had a further conversation about, whether they were doing it consciously or unconsciously, what they actually said was that, digital technologies or technology, related departments kind of wanted to follow certain types of mindsets that would help them to be extremely innovative. And that kind of led us to a particular research that was done by Google. It was called Project Aristotle. Project Aristotle, what they did was they were trying to find out who the top performing teams across Google, and they found out that the top performing teams, the common denominator was that they had psychological safety for bravery.
Okay.
And I think, I really love what you said about psychological safety for that particular example, where they went around and they were celebrating it. Psychological safety sounds so like, parallel to risk and scary and threatening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas they really celebrate safety in these tech departments that we went to have a chat with. They constantly celebrate issues that are brought up, and they're constantly using it as a point of not just safety, but a point of launch pending innovation. So you can almost imagine like a child, jumping off the couch. Either you say no, you shouldn't do that, or you make it extra safe so they can jump higher and they can do all kinds of tricks as well. So that's one of the interesting things that can happen when we, maybe, all get together and do a bit of
Right.
research, get a bit geeky about it as well. But yeah, I did want to pass over to you to share anything. I think you had slides. Did you want to share anything?
Yeah, so let's choose something that's a bit more relevant. Let me just share the screen now. Ali, can you
Um,
help? Yeah, just gonna put it in presentation mode. Don't know if it's- Okay. I wanted to share a few things, but I think this one is quite pertinent. This is one of the things that we address, right?
mhm,
Right after COVID, right? So it's about embracing transformation and adapting to the new norms, which
mhm,
which has a lot of elements in play nowadays, right? This was just coming out of the quarantine and all that during this time. So we touched on mental health epidemic and how it's affecting a lot of people, because it wasn't just about our staff's mental health at the workplace, but being realistic, we know we have staff that has spouses that has been laid off, so they're facing financial stress. They're facing a lot of family anxiety, and mental stress was one of the things that we touched on quite heavily. So what I liked about what our HSC head put together was this slide, right? So this basically um, exposes our staff that there's so many different levels of anxiety or depression or mental health that they might not know, right? So so we color coded the system. Actually, it's not a genuine idea from us. I think he referred to some websites on this, but
that's great.
so this was briefed to our HR department, and when we created that hotline, it gave our staff a term of reference. If they were facing any psychological stress or anxiety, whether it's in the workplace or what's affecting them outside of work, etc. So they're better able to express themselves how they are feeling. So I think this was an interesting one. Another thing that I want to share is after all that happened, we came up with this comprehensive health and well-being guide. This was a major undertaking by our HSC and HR department. They put this whole manual together, and as you can see, I think there's 74 pages of this, right? And we compiled this for our staff, and it takes them through everything from um, nutrition and physical health, etc. But also, there's at the end there's an element of um, mental health and how these are just some guides for our crew and our staff to have a look through it. So just to show that they have a point of
Reference.
communication,
Yeah.
reference, or even
Oh,
communication when they want to talk about anything. So
congratulations. Well done to the team that worked very, very hard to put this together. It's like a mini book that should be published already.
yeah, I
Yeah, it's
mean,
not
I
bad at
mean,
all.
we didn't copyright anything, so there's not about plagiarism, but we just compiled
I mean,
information
I
that.
think more importantly, it just shows that we're paying attention to it. And then once we pay attention to something, we activate the possibility of it, right?
Yeah,
Congratulations to your group for putting in all of that effort.
thank you. I think all the credit goes to our team. HR and HSC played a big role in this. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And Simon's got, I think, maybe our last question over here. Our thoughts on Asian culture in preventing people from speaking up. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I still stand by what I say, that the younger generation are a little bit more, not to say vocal. I think they're a bit more expressive and a bit more succinct in what they want to say, right? But it it's a combination of Asian culture and also industry culture, Simon. I think. I believe you're in the oil and gas or energy space as well. Certain environments are not really conducive to speak up, and I think that's slowly changing in the industry. But culture plays a big part, right? Asian culture, about not speaking over an elder person, or pointing out an elder person's mistakes. So it's still a journey, but I think that the workforce is getting, not to say younger, but I think that the younger Gen Zs are slowly replacing the Gen Ys, and Gen Zs are replacing the workforce nowadays. And I do believe it's just a matter of time before generational culture, you know, overcomes Asian culture. I see it already happening in other industries. Oil and gas may be a bit more unique because when you're in a very technical space, or a very high risk, high area space, you tend to want to just listen to your superior and just follow whatever that he's asking you to do. But I believe that systems in place, like I keep repeating, systems needs to be there, either a rewarding culture, or where you commend the good practices and all that. You're in a conglomerate about the primary business construction. Oh, I see. I'm not going to comment about construction and property because I wouldn't know the data from that. But
Yeah.
yeah, Asian culture does have a role to play, unfortunately. Um, not just when it comes to safety. I think when it comes to a lot of things, right?
Mm.
What's your take on it, Gatal? I mean,
Yeah,
from
I think there's always that whole concept of one team, one dream, one organization, one way of working, or one culture, one way of being. But when we look at demographic cuts and we start looking at how different segments within a culture also are quite unique, then I find it a bit difficult to understand what we mean by Asian culture.
Mm,
And also, if the assumption is that Asian culture tend to be more respectful and stuff like that, actually psychological safety has a lot to do with respect,
true.
and
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with inclusion. So I think that would be the perfect place if that is our assumption that Asians are, more inclusive. We don't like to. Psychological safety starts with inclusion and starts with respect,
Yes.
and slowly using that as a platform to learn and to ask questions and to deeply discover and to request for permission for all kinds of ideas. And then mindfulness is also a very Asian concept. Mindfulness
Mhm.
kind of came up from certain more Eastern philosophies. So mindfulness to challenge things, that
Mm,
mindfulness for the collective consciousness, the benefit of the ecosystem. I do see that every culture, so to speak, has a yin and a yang, and a certain part of the dichotomy or dimension that actually uh, naturally seeps into a conversation. And
mm,
all of us, I don't think it's a culture thing. I think all of us are trying to be the best at having a conversation, right? And we
yeah.
can use the best of our own cultural ways of having conversations.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether there's one way of having a conversation better, but there are elements that will help to get to the depth of it that can move from ego, which is me and you,
Mm,
to ecosystem and building it.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I mean, businesses in Asia are booming, and you can only have booming businesses when there are rigorous conversations that are happening.
Mhm.
Conversations that are challenging. So the fact that we are booming, in our Asian part of the world, and that we are taking strides that we've never taken strides in before, I think is definitely a testament of courage, bravery, that stems from a safe space. You have to be safe in your space yourself before you can do that. So I think there's a lot of greatness over here as well, and I do hope, like what you have said earlier, Faz, that we celebrate and pay attention to all the things that are in our
Yeah.
community that are actually already making that happen. Yeah.
I actually agree with you. I think organizational culture has to jive. I think they can work in tandem. Asian, what is Asian culture, right? I mean, the Japanese have a completely different culture than some other Asian cultures, right? But I think organizational culture should work hand in hand with, not to say taking advantage, but optimizing a specific regional culture, whatever it is, they say mindfulness or respecting elders. I think they can work hand in hand to create a really good system of openness and about having conversations and inclusions and all that, right? I mean, not every Asian household is the same. Even my household growing up, where if there's elders that came to the house, I'm always forced to sit together with them in the living room and be in that conversation. Whereas there's some households where you don't disturb the elders, you go to your room, let the elder people talk, right? So everybody's coming from a different place. But
So
yeah,
true, so true. The family upbringing and all of that as well. I think it's, one of the things that I think is why psychological safety is so important is in a world where, there's a lot of fractures. Divorce rates are close to 50% now. People are leaving very quickly in organizations, so
mm,
quickly that you don't have a chance to build a strong foundation. Then we need to have that speed of trust to create that safety very quickly, because things evolve very quickly and the turnaround is very quick as well. But I think the point of psychological safety that I would like everybody to walk away with is that, aren't conversations the most important thing in the world? And are we not doing that with ourselves all of the time and with other people directly and indirectly? Not having a conversation is also a conversation. It's also
that's
something
true.
that we're signaling as well. So
Mhm.
I think the word psychological safety, unfortunately, sounds just so technical and just sounds so like psychological that we don't realize how normal and how pervasive
Mm.
it is as well. And also over to you, Faz. Like, what is your big takeaway from this that you'd like to share with everyone? That was mine, or what is yours?
Oh, mine. Um, I think this whole conversation with you and also the questions from the audience um, has really impressed upon me that it's not just about putting into guides and references when it comes to mental stress or psychological safety. I think just like anything else, we need to have some qualitative and quantitative measures to track, how our organization and our people are doing in terms of psychological safety. Um, and it's really important because how else can we know whether someone is trying to but unable to, effect change? So yeah, it's a good challenge to throw to my HR and HSC today.
We'll be there to help you whenever you need anything at all. Please feel free to send us a text or message. And I would like to also conclude today with what you have said, the three pertinent points that I have heard that I think all of us, not just in the oil and gas sector, should remember is stop work policy, meaning at any point in time, if your gut tells you or you are telling yourself, somebody has told you that something is not right, please pay attention to it. The worst that could happen is that you stop work for a little while. That's the worst that could happen, rather than going on and not listening to your gut. The second thing would be when you see, do act as well, and
Mm,
and hopefully it doesn't have to go to a reporting system, but definitely it should. But that you see and you act compassionately to the person right in front of you. One of the things that really helped me the most was, this is a good thing. So I mentioned that, or maybe I won't mention the organization. One of the organizations that is our client, I remember I was on an escalator and I didn't hold the rail, and I was told off immediately.
I think I
Like,
know.
like literally somebody blew a whistle, not whistle blowing channel. Like
Yeah,
literally, I
yeah.
was I had a whistle blown in my face, embarrassed. And 3 days later, I was in a mall with my mom, and I told my mom, like, can you please hold the handrail because of what
Mhm.
happened to me? And thank God she did, and thank God I got through that because the escalator actually stopped, and a majority of them jolted in front, and both of us didn't. So,
Mm.
when you do that, it is an act of compassion, and compassion is a space from truth. That because truthfully, these kind of things do happen. And the third point that I think is very heartfelt, and I think only people who have experienced fatalities in the workplace, you've had somebody who's gone through that level of trauma. From you, your messages. We hope that everybody goes home safely, and that we hope that everybody, is as safe as they can be with their families as well.
Good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you, Heta. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
We'll catch up on the side as well.
All right.
Okay, dokes, take care. And together
All
with
right.
me again, it's Faz Sufyan, Exco of Moxie, and I'm Hito, CEO of OSIC. Bye.